The crowd fell silent as Sarah Mitchell and Ranger took center stage. A murmur rippled through the audience, whispers about the scarred woman with the 1,000-yard stare and her equally damaged German shepherd with the burned face and tilted head. The judges' panel exchanged knowing glances. Frank Reynolds, the competition's reigning champion trainer, made no effort to hide his smirk. Next up, competitor 17. The announcer's voice echoed flatly across the arena. No enthusiasm, no introduction, just a number. Sarah's hands trembled as she gave Ranger the first command. The dog executed perfectly, but the judges merely scribbled notes, barely looking up. Then it happened, mid-routine. Ranger froze. His good ear pivoted sharply. Before Sarah could react, he bolted breaking formation, ignoring her commands, charging straight toward the judge's platform. Laughter erupted. Someone shouted, "Can't even control her own dog." But Ranger wasn't running wild. He was running with purpose straight to Judge Harrington, who had quietly slumped in his chair, face ashen, no one noticing as the distinguished man's hand trembled, then fell limply to his side. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the woman who flinched at heights or startled at loud noises. Once, she had been Captain Mitchell, one of the Army's most respected Black Hawk helicopter pilots, with steady hands that never wavered even in Afghanistan's treacherous mountain winds. 3 tours of duty had earned her commendations and the unwavering trust of her crew. She flew rescue missions others deemed impossible, plucking injured soldiers and civilians from precarious locations with precision that became legendary in her unit. Until that day in the Hindu Kush Mountains, a routine extraction turned catastrophic when her helicopter suffered a sudden mechanical failure at 9,000 feet. The investigation would later call it a perfect storm of equipment failure and weather conditions, but Sarah remembered it as the day the sky betrayed her. The Black Hawk spun uncontrollably, crashing onto a rocky ledge. Of the 6-person crew, only Sarah survived, thrown clear of the wreckage by some cruel twist of fate that spared her life while claiming her colleagues and friends. The physical recovery took months. The psychological healing never truly began. Severe acrophobia, a cruel irony for a pilot along with PTSD and survivor's guilt, left her unable to continue service. At 38, Sarah found herself honorably discharged and utterly lost, retreating to a small ranch in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, where the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. It was at the military funeral for her crew that Ranger came into her life. The German shepherd had belonged to Corporal Mike Daniels, Sarah's crew chief and close friend. The dog had been injured in an earlier IED explosion that killed 2 other soldiers, his burned face and deaf right ear, matching Sarah's own invisible wounds. Daniels's parents approached her after the service. "Mike would want you to have him," they said, as the dog leaned against her leg. "He has no one else." Neither did Sarah. For 2 years, they existed together in isolated mutual recovery on the ranch. Sarah avoided town, people, and especially anything higher than a step stool. Ranger avoided other dogs and loud noises that he couldn't properly locate with his damaged hearing. They created their own language-modified hand signals and routines that accommodated their respective limitations. 2 broken soldiers finding balance in each other's damage. Neither was whole, but together they were enough, or so Sarah thought. Until the day Dr. Emily Turner, suggested they enter the regional service dog competition. "He has a gift." Sarah, Dr. Emily Turner insisted, checking Ranger's ears during their monthly checkup at the small veterinary clinic. "I've been watching how he anticipates your anxiety attacks before they even start." Sarah shook her head, running her fingers through her short blonde hair that had long ago replaced her military regulation cut but still maintained its utilitarian style. "He's just attuned to me. That's not a service dog quality." Emily's eyes, warm and persistent, met Sarah's guarded gaze. "That's exactly what it is. And the regional service dog competition would be the perfect place to show what teams like yours can do. Teams that don't fit the mold," Sarah scoffed, scratching behind Ranger's good ear as he leaned against her leg. "A half-deaf dog and a pilot who can't climb a ladder? We'd be laughed out of the arena." "Maybe," Emily conceded, closing her examination kit. "Or maybe you'd change some minds about what disabled really means." The seed was planted, though Sarah tried to ignore it, but that night, watching Ranger alert to a deer at the edge of their property, compensating for his deaf ear by using his eyes and nose more effectively than any dog she'd known, the idea resurfaced. 3 days later, Sarah found herself white-knuckling the steering wheel of her faded blue pickup truck, taking her first trip into Bozeman in nearly 4 months. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, his burned face turned toward her as if sensing the battle raging inside her chest. Main Street's mundane traffic felt overwhelming. Sarah pulled into a parking space 2 blocks from the competition registration office and sat trembling, unable to turn off the ignition. "This was a mistake," she whispered, her heart hammered, vision tunneling as sweat beaded on her forehead. The last time she'd attempted something like this, a veterans support group in Missoula, she'd ended up hyperventilating in a bathroom stall, while concerned voices called through the door. Ranger's warm muzzle pressed against her clenched hand on the gear shift, his single brown eye fixed on her face, unwavering and calm. He whined softly, then pressed his paw against her leg, their private signal that had evolved naturally over their time together. "Okay," she breathed, nodding as if answering a question. "Okay, boy." The registration office buzzed with activity handlers and their immaculately groomed, perfectly behaved service dogs moving with precision and purpose. Sarah felt painfully conspicuous in her worn jeans and flannel shirt, Ranger's scarred face drawing stares that people quickly averted when she caught them looking. Competition entrant. The woman at the desk smiled professionally, though her eyes lingered on Ranger's twisted ear. "Yes," Sarah managed, sliding the completed form across the counter. "Team division." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly as she reviewed the form. "Military service-related disability." Sarah nodded stiffly. "And the dog's disability?" The question came from behind, the voice deep and laced with barely concealed disdain. Sarah turned to face a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, silver-haired and wearing a polo shirt emblazoned with Reynolds Professional K9 Training. 3 handlers with matching shirts stood nearby, each with a perfect German shepherd at heel. "Excuse me." Sarah's voice took on the hardness that once commanded helicopter crews through Taliban airspace. "Frank Reynolds," he offered without extending his hand. "5-time national champion trainer." I couldn't help overhearing. His eyes flicked dismissively to Ranger. "Service dogs aren't supposed to need service themselves. That's the point." The room had quieted, attention turning toward the confrontation. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. the familiar tightness constricting her chest. "Ranger is deaf in one ear," she said, hating how defensive she sounded. "It doesn't affect his abilities." Frank's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The competition has standards, Ms." He glanced at her form. "Mitchell, this isn't a charity event for broken teams." "That's enough." "Frank," the registration woman's voice was sharp, "the rules don't disqualify dogs with disabilities if they can perform the required tasks." Frank shrugged, turning away. "Your funeral? Just keep the damaged goods away from my teams. Wouldn't want them picking up bad habits." As he walked away, Sarah noticed a man standing quietly in the corner, watching the exchange with unusual intensity. Middle-aged, with salt and pepper hair and the straight posture of military background, he looked vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. When their eyes met, he quickly turned away, engaging another judge in conversation. That night in their motel room, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, reviewing the competition handbook while Ranger paced restlessly. Twice he stopped at the window, staring out into the parking lot with unusual focus, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Sarah parted the curtains but saw only empty spaces and the distant glow of the highway. She fell into uneasy sleep, the nightmare returning as it often did, the helicopter spinning, alarms blaring, her crew's voices calling out in confusion. But this time, a new detail emerged, a maintenance signature on the clipboard she'd checked before takeoff. A name that hadn't registered in her memory until now. F. Reynolds, Mechanical Certification Officer. Sarah woke with a start, sweat-soaked and gasping. Ranger stood alert by the door, his body tense, eyes fixed on the handle as if someone stood just outside. But when Sarah checked, the hallway was empty. In the dim light of dawn, she found footprints in the dewy grass beneath their window. Someone had been watching them during the night. The competition's preliminary round began at 9 the next morning in Bozeman's Agricultural Event Center. The cavernous space, with its high ceilings and elevated seating, sent immediate waves of anxiety through Sarah's body. She stood at the entrance, frozen, as other competitors flowed around her with their dogs. "First time?" A woman with a chocolate Labrador paused beside her. "I'm Beth Wilson. This is Cooper." Sarah nodded stiffly, unable to tear her eyes from the 30-foot ceiling beams. "Sarah Mitchell. Ranger." Beth followed her gaze upward. "The height thing, I read your registration. PTSD from Afghanistan. Right. Helicopter crash." Sarah managed, her mouth dry. 4 years ago?" Beth nodded matter-of-factly. "IED for me, Iraq, 2011. Lost my left leg below the knee." She tapped her prosthetic leg. "Cooper helps with balance and retrieval. What's Ranger's specialty?" The straightforward question, free of pity, loosened something in Sarah's chest. "Anxiety alert. He can sense an attack coming before I know it's happening." The first event was an obstacle course designed to test the handler-dog team's communication and problem-solving abilities. Sarah watched as Frank Reynolds' lead team navigated the course flawlessly, the handler directing his dog through tunnels, over low jumps, and across narrow walkways with barely perceptible commands. "Perfect execution from Team Reynolds again," the announcer's voice boomed. "Setting the standard as always." When their turn came, Sarah and Ranger started strong, His keen attention compensated for his hearing deficit as they moved through the first obstacles. Then they reached the elevated platform, a 6-foot-high walkway that handlers and dogs needed to cross together. Sarah froze at the bottom of the ramp, her vision swimming. 6 feet might as well have been 6,000. Her pulse hammered in her ears, drowning out the murmurs from the crowd. Ranger whined softly, pressing against her leg. "Ms. Mitchell, you need to proceed or forfeit the round," a judge called. Ranger looked up at her, then at the platform, then back to her face, reading her fear. He took a tentative step up the ramp, looking back expectantly. Sarah placed one foot on the incline, then another. 3 steps up. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her. Images flashed, the helicopter dashboard spinning, the mountain rushing up to meet them. Her knees buckled. She was vaguely aware of Ranger barking, of hands helping her back to solid ground, of sympathetic murmurs and not-so-sympathetic laughter. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we don't bring damaged goods to a professional competition. Frank Reynolds's voice carried from nearby. The blind leading the blind, or in this case, the terrified leading the deaf. "Shut up, Frank." It was Beth's voice, sharp with anger. At least she had the courage to try. Back in the preparation area, Sarah sat with her head between her knees, breathing slowly as Ranger kept vigilant watch beside her. The shame burned worse than the fear. "Captain Mitchell?" Sarah looked up to find the gray-haired man she'd noticed at registration standing before her. His badge identified him as Judge James Harrington. "How did you know my rank?" she asked. Something flickered across his face, recognition. Perhaps regret. "Your military service is noted in your registration. It says former pilot, not rank." Harrington shifted uncomfortably. "You seem familiar. That's all. Many veterans in these competitions." He hesitated. "Don't let today discourage you. The final rounds judge different skills." As he walked away, Sarah noticed him pull out a phone, speaking in low tones. She caught fragments. "Definitely Mitchell's unit. Not sure she remembers me. Need more time." That evening, while Ranger was occupied with his dinner, Sarah used the motel's business center computer to search for information on James Harrington. What she found sent a chill through her body. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington, M.D., former chief surgeon, 59th Medical Wing, deployed Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, during the exact period of her crash. The man who had pronounced her crew members dead. The man who had saved her life. The following morning, Sarah confronted Harrington in the judge's break room. "You were there," she said without preamble. "You operated on me after the crash." Harrington closed the door behind them, his expression grave. "I wasn't sure you'd remember. You were barely conscious when they brought you in. Why are you here? Why now?" He hesitated. "Coincidence. Initially, I volunteer as a judge in these competitions since retiring from the Army. When I saw your name on the registration," he trailed off. What aren't you telling me? I've been looking for you, Captain Mitchell, for several years, actually. After you left the service, you disappeared from the radar. I have something for you from Corporal Daniels." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Mike is dead," Yes, but before your mission, he left something with me. A letter, in case anything happened to him. Harrington's eyes fell on Ranger, who had positioned himself protectively at Sarah's side. I see you have his dog. What did the letter say? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Harrington shook his head. I think you're not ready yet. Complete the competition. Prove something to yourself first. Then we'll talk. As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. The crash, was it really just mechanical failure and bad weather? Harrington paused, his hand on the doorknob. The official report is public record. That's not what I asked. His eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. No, it wasn't. But this isn't the place for that conversation. The preliminary results were posted that afternoon. Despite their platform failure, Sarah and Ranger had scored high enough in the other elements to qualify for the final rounds barely. Frank Reynolds' teams occupied the top 3 positions. As Sarah studied the scoreboard, she felt a presence behind her. Pity qualifications, Frank said, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. The judges feel sorry for the crippled vet and her defective dog. We earned our spot, Sarah replied, turning to face him. Did you? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Tell me, Captain Mitchell, do you ever think about that day? The Hindu Kush. The mechanical failure that should have been caught in pre-flight. Ice flooded Sarah's veins. How do you know where my crash was? Army aviation is a small world. He leaned closer. Some might say that missing obvious maintenance issues is negligence, criminal even, especially when lives are lost. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving Sarah standing frozen. Ranger pressing anxiously against her leg as a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. The motel room felt like a cage as Sarah paced its length, Ranger tracking her movements with concerned eyes. Frank Reynolds' words echoed in her mind, too specific, too pointed to be coincidence. She pulled out her old service laptop, rarely used since her discharge, and logged into the veterans' database where the redacted crash report resided. What are we missing? Boy, she murmured, as Ranger rested his head on her knee. The report told her nothing new, catastrophic mechanical failure, extreme weather conditions, pilot error ruled out. But a footnote caught her attention. Maintenance inspection signed off by civilian contractor FR, Apex Helicopter Systems, the same initials that had surfaced in her nightmare. A knock at her door startled her. Ranger was instantly alert, moving to stand between Sarah and the entrance, but his posture remained relaxed. Whoever was there wasn't perceived as a threat. Beth Wilson stood in the hallway, leaning slightly on her cane, her service dog, Cooper, sitting perfectly at her side. "Thought you might want to grab dinner," she said. "First rounds are brutal. I always need to decompress." Over burgers at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town, Beth spoke with the directness Sarah had come to appreciate. "So, what's the deal with you and Reynolds? He seems to have a special kind of hatred reserved just for you." Sarah hesitated, then found herself explaining her suspicions, the connection to her crash. His cryptic comments, Judge Harrington's evasiveness. Beth whistled low. That's heavy. You think he had something to do with your helicopter malfunction? I don't know, Sarah admitted, but his name is on the maintenance records, and he seems to know details about the crash that weren't public. And now you're both at the same competition 4 years later. That's one hell of a coincidence. Sarah nodded, absent-mindedly running her fingers over Ranger's scarred ear. Plus, Harrington was the surgeon who saved me after the crash. He says he has a letter from Mike Ranger's original owner, my crew chief. Beth sat back, eyes widening. Okay. That's definitely weird. What did the letter say? He wouldn't tell me. Said I wasn't ready yet. Whatever that means. Beth studied her for a moment. What are you going to do? Complete the competition, Sarah said, surprising herself with her resolve. Whatever's going on, I need to see it through. The next day brought the second preliminary round scent detection and alert behaviors. This was where Ranger truly excelled. His hearing loss had enhanced his other senses, particularly his ability to detect subtle changes in Sarah's body chemistry before a panic attack. They practiced behind the arena, Sarah deliberately triggering mild anxiety by visualizing the helicopter cockpit, while Ranger demonstrated his alert sequence, first a gentle paw on her leg, then pressing his body against hers if the anxiety increased, finally retrieving her medication pouch if needed. That's remarkable, came Harrington's voice from behind them. I've never seen such precise escalating alerts. Sarah turned, Ranger staying close to her side. He figured it out himself. I just learned to understand what he was telling me. Harrington knelt to Ranger's level, respecting the working dog's space. Corporal Daniels trained him well before. He trailed off. Before the IED that damaged his hearing, Sarah finished. Mike loved this dog. Said Ranger saved their unit twice by detecting explosives before anyone else. Did he tell you how Ranger got his name? Sarah shook her head. Ghost Squadron, Harrington said softly. Your crew chief's previous unit. They called themselves the Phantoms because they flew night missions no one else would take. Ranger was their unofficial mascot before becoming Daniels's personal dog. The competition arena was more crowded for the second round. Sarah noticed Frank Reynolds watching from the sidelines, his expression unreadable as she and Ranger took their positions. This event required the dog to detect a specific scent in this case, a simulation of diabetic shock hidden somewhere in the arena, then alert appropriately. Ranger moved with purpose, his nose working systematically across the space, his single good ear twisted and turned, compensating for the deaf one by relying more heavily on his visual cues and scent tracking. He ignored the distractions planted throughout food, toys, other scents, focusing with military precision on his task. When he found the hidden scent patch under a chair, his alert was textbook, sitting immediately. Then looking back at Sarah, waiting for her acknowledgement before leading her to the source. The crowd's applause held genuine appreciation this time. Even the judges looked impressed, though Frank Reynolds merely scowled from his position near the exit. Second highest score of the round, Beth told her afterward, examining the scoreboard. You're moving up the rankings. That night, Sarah dreamed again of the crash, but this time the details were sharper. The maintenance clipboard she'd checked before takeoff, the signature at the bottom F, Reynolds, mechanical certification, the small notation beside it, hydraulic system check deferred, temporary waiver approved. She woke with a gasp. finding Ranger already alert, standing by the window again, his body tense. Sarah slipped out of bed and carefully approached, peering through the blinds. In the dim light of the parking lot, she caught a glimpse of a figure retreating toward a dark SUV, tall, broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable gait of Frank Reynolds. The next morning, Sarah found Beth in the breakfast area of the motel, Cooper resting beneath her table. "I need your help," Sarah said without preamble. "I think Reynolds is stalking me. He was outside my room last night." Beth's eyes narrowed. "That's crossing a line. Have you told security? And say what? That I suspect a celebrated dog trainer of sabotaging my military helicopter 4 years ago, and now he's lurking in a public parking lot. They'd think I'm paranoid." "Fair point," Beth conceded. "What do you need?" "Information. Reynolds runs a training center here in Montana. I need to know if he worked for Apex Helicopter Systems during my deployment." Beth pulled out her phone. "My brother's a private investigator in Denver. Let me make a call." The third day of preliminaries focused on assistance tasks, retrieving objects, opening doors, providing stability support. These exercises played to Ranger's strengths and Sarah's growing confidence. For the first time since the crash, she felt the familiar rhythm of working in sync with a partner, reminiscent of her flight crew days. During their lunch break, Beth found Sarah with news. "My brother came through. Reynolds worked as a civilian contractor for Apex from 2018 to 2021, primarily on Black Hawk maintenance certifications in Afghanistan. He was stationed at Bagram during your crash." Sarah felt her suspicions crystallizing into certainty. "That can't be coincidence. There's more," Beth continued. "He was investigated after a separate incident, another helicopter with maintenance issues. Nothing was proven. But he left the contractor position suddenly afterward, started focusing exclusively on his dog training business." "What kind of maintenance issues?" "Same as yours, hydraulic system failure. But that helicopter landed safely." The revelation settled like a stone in Sarah's stomach. "I need to talk to Harrington. He knows something." Finding the judge proved difficult. He was busy with scoring and administrative duties throughout the day. It wasn't until the evening announcement of final round qualifiers that Sarah managed to approach him. "We need to talk," she said quietly, as competitors gathered around the scoreboard. "About Frank Reynolds and Apex Systems." Harrington's face tightened. "Not here. Meet me at the judge's lounge after the crowd disperses." But when Sarah arrived at the designated location an hour later, Harrington wasn't there. Instead, she found a note. "Too many eyes. Will contact you tomorrow. Be careful who you trust." The parking lot was dark as Sarah walked Ranger back to their motel room, her mind racing with questions. A sudden movement behind a parked truck sent Ranger into alert stance, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Who's there?" Sarah called, her hand instinctively reaching for Ranger's harness. Frank Reynolds stepped into the light, his smile cold. "Just getting some air, Captain. Congratulations on making the finals. Quite the comeback story." "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, maintaining her distance. "Want nothing at all. Just curious why you're so interested in ancient history. Helicopter crashes, maintenance records, that's all in the past. Isn't it? Not when people died because of negligence." Something dangerous flickered in Reynolds' eyes. "Accidents happen in war zones, Captain. The official report was clear mechanical failure combined with severe weather conditions. No one was at fault. Then why are you following me? Why were you outside my room last night? Reynolds laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Paranoia is a common symptom of PTSD, you know. I was having drinks with the judges last night. You can verify that with Harrington. Before Sarah could respond, Beth's voice called from across the lot. Sarah, everything okay? Reynolds nodded curtly and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. What was that about? Beth asked, Cooper alert at her side. Reynolds, denying everything. Of course. Sarah watched the space where he'd vanished. But he's worried. I can feel it. Back in her room, Sarah tried Harrington's cell number, but it went straight to voicemail. She spent hours reviewing her notes and memories, trying to piece together the connections. Eventually, she fell into restless sleep. Ranger positioned vigilantly by the door. The dream came again, the helicopter, the mountains, the spinning descent. But this time, she saw something new. Mike Daniels, her crew chief, arguing with someone before the flight, a tall man with a clipboard. Frank Reynolds pointing to something on the maintenance sheet. Mike's face, concerned, shaking his head. Sarah jolted awake to find Ranger in full alert, hackles raised, staring at the door. A moment later, a soft knock sounded. Heart pounding, she approached cautiously. Who is it? Beth, open up. Quick. Sarah unlatched the door to find Beth looking pale, Cooper at attention beside her. Harrington's in the hospital, Beth said without preamble. Apparent heart attack during dinner. They rushed him to Bozeman Medical Center an hour ago. Sarah's blood ran cold. Heart attack? Or something else? My thoughts exactly. Especially after he was asking questions about Reynolds at the judge's dinner. Sarah grabbed her jacket. I need to see him. That's why I'm here. My truck's running. The hospital corridors were quiet at the late hour. Beth's brother, the private investigator, had called ahead to a contact, enabling them to learn that Harrington was stabilized in the cardiac unit. Security was minimal, a single desk attendant who barely glanced up as they walked past, service dogs in tow. Outside Harrington's room, Sarah hesitated. What if we're wrong? What if it was just a heart attack? Then we apologize for disturbing his recovery, Beth said practically. But your military instincts are screaming just like mine are. Something's not right. Harrington was awake, though pale and tired-looking. When they entered, his eyes widened at the sight of Sarah and Ranger. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice weak. Not safe. What happened? Sarah asked, moving to his bedside while Ranger sniffed the room systematically. Food poisoning. They think, or at least that's the official story. His eyes met hers with meaning. Started right after I mentioned to Reynolds that I was planning to speak with you about the maintenance records, so it wasn't a heart attack. Symptoms mimicked one. They're running toxicology now. He reached for the water glass beside his bed with a shaking hand. I was going to give you the letter tomorrow. Now I'm not sure I'll have the chance. What letter? From Mike Daniels. What does it say? Harrington's eyes moved to the small locker beside his bed. My personal effects, inside jacket pocket. Beth kept watch at the door while Sarah retrieved a worn envelope from Harrington's jacket. Her name was written on the front in Mike's familiar handwriting, sending a wave of emotion through her. "He gave it to me the day before your final mission," Harrington explained. "Said he had a bad feeling, wanted someone to pass it along if anything happened." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the unopened letter. "Why didn't you give it to me in the hospital after the crash?" "You were in no condition to receive it then. And afterward, you disappeared. Changed your contact information. Moved to the middle of nowhere." Harrington's breathing was labored. "Reynolds was there. You know, at the hospital after they brought you in, asking questions about what you remembered. I thought it was standard contractor follow-up at the time." Ranger suddenly lifted his head, attention focused on the door. A moment later, a nurse entered, checking Harrington's monitors. "You shouldn't have visitors this late," she said disapprovingly. "Service dog training emergency." Beth improvised smoothly. "Judge Harrington is our certification authority. We'll be leaving shortly." When the nurse left, Harrington continued, his voice lower. "Reynolds was responsible for the hydraulic system inspection on your helicopter, the one that failed. There was another incident 3 months earlier, similar issues, but the pilot managed an emergency landing." "Why wasn't this in the official report?" Sarah asked. "It was classified. Military contractor protection protocols." Harrington's eyes were grave. "Daniels knew. He filed a safety concern report the day before your flight. That's what's in the letter, I believe. He suspected the hydraulic lines hadn't been properly secured after maintenance." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly, Ranger immediately pressing against her leg in response to her rising anxiety. "Reynolds knew Mike suspected something." Harrington nodded weakly. "And now Reynolds knows I have information too. Be careful, Captain. The final's tomorrow." "You think he'd try something at the competition? I think a man who's covered up negligence for 4 years might do anything to keep it buried." Harrington's eyes were drifting closed, fatigue overtaking him. "Read the letter, then decide what to do." Outside in the hospital corridor, Sarah stared at the envelope in her hands, her world shifting on its axis. "You going to open it?" Beth asked gently. "Not yet," Sarah said, carefully tucking the letter into her jacket. "First, we need to prepare for tomorrow. If Reynolds is desperate enough to poison a judge, he's dangerous." Beth nodded, her expression grim. "What's the plan?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a clarity she hadn't experienced since before the crash. "We're going to win this competition, and then we're going to expose Frank Reynolds for what he is." As they walked toward the elevator, Ranger suddenly stiffened, his attention fixed on a man turning the corner ahead, a hospital security guard who looked remarkably like one of Reynolds' assistant trainers. "Change of plans," Sarah murmured, pulling Beth toward the stairwell instead. "We need to take a different exit." That night, back at the motel, Sarah finally opened Mike Daniels' letter with trembling fingers. Ranger sat beside her, his head on her knee, a solid presence as she read the words of her long-dead friend. "Sarah, if you're reading this, things went sideways. I've filed an official safety concern, but Reynolds is blocking it. The hydraulic lines on our bird were compromised during the last maintenance cycle. I saw it myself but was overruled. I've documented everything and left copies with my parents. If anything happens, it wasn't your fault. Take care of Ranger for me. He sees things others don't, just like you always did. Ghost Squadron forever. Mike. Sarah's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink as years of misplaced guilt began to crumble under the weight of truth. Ranger whined softly, licking her hand, and for the first time since the crash, Sarah allowed herself to grieve not for her own survival, but for what had been stolen from her crew. Dawn found her standing at the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, Ranger vigilant beside her. The final round of competition lay ahead, and with it, a reckoning 4 years in the making. The Agricultural Events Center hummed with anticipation as spectators filled the stands for the championship rounds. 8 finalist teams had made the cut, including Sarah and Ranger, who had qualified in 6th place. Frank Reynolds's teams occupied the top 3 positions, their handlers moving with practiced confidence during the morning warm-up sessions. Sarah kept Ranger close, her eyes constantly scanning the arena for Reynolds. The letter from Mike weighed heavy in her pocket, physical proof of the negligence that had cost 4 lives. Beth had arrived early to secure seats near the judges' panel, Cooper alert at her feet. Harrington's place among the judges remained empty. A medical emergency, the only explanation offered. "Competitors, please prepare for the final demonstration round." The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "Today's challenge will test your team's ability to respond to unexpected emergency scenarios. Each team will face a unique situation requiring quick thinking and flawless execution." Sarah knelt beside Ranger, running her hands over his scarred face. "Whatever happens today, you're already the best partner I could ask for," she whispered. His good ear twitched toward her voice, his single eye focused intently on her face. The bond between them, forged in shared trauma and daily battles against their limitations, felt unbreakable. Reynolds appeared at the edge of the staging area, speaking intently with one of the judges. His gaze drifted to Sarah, narrowing slightly before he turned away. She noticed him check his watch, an almost imperceptible gesture that nonetheless sent a chill down her spine. "Something's not right," she murmured to Ranger, who had also focused his attention on Reynolds, body slightly tensed. The competition began with Reynolds' top team demonstrating an impressive emergency response scenario. Their German Shepherd flawlessly retrieved a hidden phone, activated an emergency call button, and guided first responders to its handler, who simulated unconsciousness. The crowd erupted in applause as the scores came in nearly perfect. 2 more teams performed with varying degrees of success before Sarah and Ranger were called to the floor. As they took their position at center stage, Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, not from fear of heights this time, but from the weight of what they faced. "Team Mitchell, your scenario involves medical alert and response," the head judge announced. "Your task is to identify the person in medical distress among our volunteers, alert appropriately, and assist until help arrives." Sarah scanned the 5 volunteers seated in a semicircle near the judge's stand, 1 woman, 3 men, and a teenager, all appearing perfectly normal. This was Ranger's specialty, identifying distress through subtle changes in body chemistry and behavior. She gave him the command, "Ranger, seek help." Ranger moved forward with purpose, his nose working as he approached each volunteer in turn. He passed the first 3 without alerting, then paused briefly at the 4th before moving on. When he reached the teenage boy, he hesitated, sniffing intently before returning to Sarah without signaling. confused. Sarah gave the command again. This was unlike Ranger. He was meticulous in his alerts. He moved through the volunteers once more, this time stopping longer at the middle-aged man, but still returned without alerting. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah could feel the judge's disappointed gazes. Something was wrong. Ranger wasn't confused. He was telling her something she wasn't understanding. Then, suddenly, Ranger's head snapped toward the judge's platform. His body tensed, attention completely diverted from the volunteers. Before Sarah could react, he bolted, breaking away from her side and charging toward the elevated judge's stand. Laughter erupted from parts of the audience. Someone called out, "Control your dog!" Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but something in Ranger's urgency kept her from calling him back. Instead, she followed, watching as Ranger leaped up the 3 steps to the judge's platform and made a beeline for an older judge seated at the far end, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair who had replaced Harrington. As Ranger reached him, the judge was raising a water bottle to his lips. Ranger barked sharply, an action he rarely took, and bumped the man's hand hard enough to send the water bottle clattering to the floor. The judge recoiled in shock, his face flushing with anger. "Control your animal!" he demanded as security personnel moved toward the platform. But Sarah had caught up now, and what she saw stopped her cold. The judge, James Harrington's replacement, was sweating profusely despite the air-conditioned venue. His hand trembled slightly, and his pupils were unusually constricted. These weren't normal signs of anger or surprise. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm as she signaled Ranger to stand down. "I'm fine," the judge snapped. "Your dog just assaulted me and ruined this demonstration." Sarah's military medical training kicked in as she noticed his slurred speech, subtle, but definitely present. "Sir, I think you need medical attention. These are symptoms of—" "I said I'm fine." The judge attempted to stand, but swayed alarmingly. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shifting to the commanding tone she'd used in crisis situations during her military service. "This man needs medical attention immediately. Possible poison or stroke." The crowd fell silent as the judge collapsed back into his chair, his breathing becoming labored. Security personnel who had been approaching to remove Sarah now turned their attention to the judge, one speaking urgently into a radio for medical assistance. Sarah knelt beside the judge, quickly checking his pulse while Ranger stood vigilant nearby. "Sir, when did you start feeling unwell? Did you eat or drink anything unusual?" "Water," he managed, gesturing weakly toward the fallen bottle. "Bitter taste." Sarah glanced at the water bottle on the platform, then at Frank Reynolds, who stood frozen at the edge of the arena, his face a mask of shock. Their eyes met for a brief moment before he turned abruptly and began moving toward the exit. "Stop that man," Sarah called out, pointing toward Reynolds. "He may be connected to this medical emergency." As security personnel moved to intercept Reynolds, Sarah returned her attention to the ailing judge. The man's condition was deteriorating rapidly, his breathing shallow, skin clammy. This wasn't a heart attack or stroke. The symptoms aligned with what Harrington had experienced: poisoning. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately," Sarah told the approaching EMTs. "Possible toxin ingestion. Same symptoms as Judge Harrington from last night." As the medical team transferred the judge to a stretcher, Sarah faced a critical decision. The judge's platform stood 6 feet above the arena floor, the same height that had triggered her paralyzing acrophobia in the first round. To follow the medical team, She would need to descend the stairs, but they were now blocked by the stretcher and emergency personnel. The only other exit was across the platform to stairs on the far side, requiring her to walk 10 feet across the elevated platform with nothing but open space beyond the railing. Her vision swam at the mere thought, cold sweat breaking out across her forehead. Ranger sensed her distress immediately, pressing firmly against her leg their established signal. His scarred face looked up at her with complete trust, his body positioning to guide her. The crowd had risen to their feet, watching the drama unfold. Sarah could see Beth pushing through security to reach the platform stairs, but she was being held back. The EMTs were moving the judge toward the main exit, valuable information about his symptoms leaving with them. "I have to do this," Sarah whispered to Ranger. "Guide me." Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on Ranger's harness and took the first step. Immediately, the familiar vertigo hit her, the platform seeming to tilt and sway. Her heart hammered against her ribs as flashbacks threatened to overwhelm her, the helicopter spinning, mountains rushing up, her crew's voices crying out. Ranger pressed firmly against her legs, creating a solid anchor point. He moved slowly, deliberately, guiding her one step at a time across the platform. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on his scarred back, focusing on the rhythm of their movement rather than the open space around them. "The dog is guiding her across," someone in the crowd murmured. "She can't handle heights." Halfway across, Sarah made the mistake of glancing toward the arena floor. The 6-foot drop suddenly looked like 1,000 feet, her vision tunneling as panic clawed at her throat. Her legs locked in place, trembling violently. Ranger responded instantly. Instead of pulling forward, he circled around to face her, rising up to place his front paws on her shoulders, a modification of his anxiety response they had practiced in private but never demonstrated publicly. The unexpected weight and pressure broke through her panic, forcing her attention back to him. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Good boy." The crowd had fallen completely silent, watching as the scarred woman and her equally damaged dog made their painstaking way across the platform. When they finally reached the stairs on the far side, spontaneous applause broke out, not the polite acknowledgement of a competition performance, but the genuine recognition of a profound act of courage. Sarah descended the stairs on unsteady legs, Ranger never leaving her side. As soon as they reached ground level, Beth pushed through to them, Cooper at her heels. "That was incredible," Beth said, gripping Sarah's arm to steady her. "But Reynolds is trying to leave. Security's holding him at the south entrance." Sarah nodded, her mind clearing as adrenaline sharpened her focus. "We need to get to that judge before the evidence disappears. Did you see him drink from that water bottle?" "Yes, just before Ranger alerted. Reynolds handed it to him personally about 5 minutes before your demonstration began." They made their way quickly to the south entrance, where 2 security guards were questioning a visibly agitated Frank Reynolds. "This is ridiculous," he was saying as they approached. "I'm late for another appointment. You have no right to detain me." "This woman says you may have information about a medical emergency," one guard responded. Reynolds' eyes narrowed as he spotted Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, I should have known you'd be behind this circus, still trying to blame others for your failures." Sarah stepped forward, Ranger alert at her side. "The water bottle you gave Judge Carlton was poisoned, just like what happened to Judge Harrington last night." "That's absurd. I gave him bottled water as a courtesy. It was sealed." Was it the same courtesy you extended to my helicopter's hydraulic system 4 years ago? Sarah's voice was steel, the one that failed and killed my crew. Reynolds' face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about. Corporal Mike Daniels documented your negligence before the crash. He filed a safety concern that you blocked. Sarah pulled the letter from her pocket. He left evidence in case anything happened. For a moment, something like fear flickered across Reynolds' face. Then his expression hardened. You have no proof of anything except your own delusions. Captain, PTSD has clearly affected your judgment. A commotion at the main entrance drew their attention as paramedics rushed the stricken judge toward waiting ambulances. Sarah broke away from the confrontation, hurrying toward the medical team with Ranger keeping pace. I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, Army Medic Training, she called to the lead EMT. The symptoms match a case from last night, Judge Harrington. Possible targeted poisoning. The paramedic nodded grimly. BP dropping. Respiration shallow. Similar presentation to last night's case. Police are already at the hospital. The water bottle is evidence, Sarah insisted. It needs to be secured. Already bagged by security, the paramedic confirmed. Going straight to toxicology. As the ambulance doors closed, Sarah turned back to find Reynolds being formally detained by police officers who had arrived on the scene. Beth stood nearby, her expression grim but satisfied. Local PD got a call from the hospital about Harrington, Beth explained. When the second judge showed identical symptoms, they connected the dots. They're holding Reynolds for questioning. Sarah watched as Reynolds was escorted to a police cruiser, his face a mask of controlled fury. Their eyes met briefly through the vehicle's window, his cold with hatred, hers steady with the truth she had carried for 4 years. The competition director approached, looking shaken. Captain Mitchell, I don't know exactly what happened here, but your dog's actions may have saved Judge Carlton's life. The event is obviously suspended, but I want you to know that what we witnessed today transcends any competition score. The arena had mostly emptied, spectators dispersing as news of the medical emergency spread. Sarah stood in the suddenly quiet space, Ranger leaning against her leg, the weight of the past 4 years lifting incrementally from her shoulders. He knew, she said softly to Beth. Ranger knew the judge was in danger. Not any of the volunteers. That's why he wouldn't alert during the demonstration. Beth nodded. Cooper can detect seizures 3 minutes before they happen. These animals perceive things we can't even imagine. Sarah knelt beside Ranger, running her hands over his scarred face and twisted ear. Mike was right about you, she whispered. You see things others don't. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah paused to look back at the judge's platform, the elevated space she had crossed, despite her crippling fear. The distance seemed simultaneously immense and trivial, a perfect metaphor for the journey she had been on since the crash. For the first time in 4 years, Captain Sarah Mitchell felt the faintest flicker of something she had thought lost forever, the belief that she could still rise above her damage and fear, still find purpose in a world that had taken so much from her. And it had taken her scarred, half-deaf dog equally broken but infinitely determined to show her the way. The fluorescent lights of the Bozeman Police Department cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she finished giving her statement. 4 hours of detailed questioning had left her drained, her voice hoarse from recounting the helicopter crash, Mike's letter, Harrington's revelations, and the events at the competition. Ranger lay at her feet, refusing to leave her side despite officers offering water and a more comfortable space for him in another room. "We'll need to keep the original letter as evidence," Detective Morgan said, carefully placing Mike's letter in an evidence bag. "But we've made copies for you." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline that had carried her through the competition and Reynolds' confrontation had long since faded, leaving her hollow. "You did good work today, Captain," the detective continued, his weathered face softening. "Judge Carlton is stable." Toxicology confirmed the same compound in his system as they found in Judge Harrington, a sophisticated toxin that mimics cardiac symptoms but breaks down quickly in the bloodstream. Without immediate treatment, he likely wouldn't have survived. The words should have brought comfort, but Sarah felt only a crushing wave of delayed shock. They had prevented a murder today. Reynolds had been willing to kill to keep his negligence hidden. How many others might have died if the truth had come out sooner? "What about the families?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "My crew's families. Do they know yet?" "Not officially. That will come after formal charges are filed." Detective Morgan hesitated. "But they deserve to hear it from you first, if you're up to it." The thought of facing the families, of telling them their loved ones had died not from unavoidable tragedy, but from one man's criminal negligence, sent a wave of nausea through Sarah. She had avoided them after the funeral, unable to bear their kindness when she believed herself responsible for their loss. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. Detective Morgan nodded, understanding. "Take some time. This case won't be resolved quickly." Outside in the waiting area, Beth stood as Sarah emerged with Ranger. "You look like hell," she said bluntly, the concern in her eyes softening the words. "Feel worse," Sarah managed. "Let's get you back to the motel. Cooper's been worried about Ranger." The drive passed in silence, Sarah staring out the window as Montana's vast landscape rolled by. So different from the jagged mountains of Afghanistan, yet somehow triggering the same hollow ache in her chest. By the time they reached the motel, twilight had fallen, casting long shadows across the parking lot. "Want company?" Beth asked as she pulled up outside Sarah's room. Sarah shook her head. "Need some time. Thanks for everything today. Call if you need anything." "I mean it." Inside the sparse motel room, Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, Ranger settling beside her with his head on her knee. The silence pressed in around them, broken only by the distant sounds of traffic and the hum of the aging air conditioner. She reached for her phone, scrolling to a number she hadn't called in 4 years. Angela Daniels, Mike's mother, the woman who had entrusted her with Ranger at the funeral. Her finger hovered over the call button, then retreated. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, she pulled up the photos she never looked at her crew, smiling outside their helicopter on a clear Afghan morning. Lieutenant Jackson with his ever-present toothpick. Warrant Officer Chen adjusting her helmet. Sergeant Miller making bunny ears behind Corporal Daniels, who was kneeling with a younger, unscarred Ranger. "They should be here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not me." The tears came, then not the controlled, private grieving she had permitted herself in small doses over the years, but raw, guttural sobs that tore from her chest. 4 years of survivor's guilt, of believing she had somehow failed her crew, crashed over her like a physical force. Ranger whined, pressing closer, trying to provide the comfort he'd been trained to give. But this grief was too big, too overwhelming for his usual interventions. Sarah slid from the bed to the floor. Arms wrapped around herself as if physically holding her breaking heart together. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry." Ranger circled her anxiously, whining, then suddenly bolted to the door, barking urgently. Sarah barely registered the sound until a knock followed. "Sarah?" Beth's voice. "I forgot to give you the medication information for Judge Carlton. Are you okay?" Sarah couldn't answer. Couldn't move from the floor. After a moment, the door opened. Beth had apparently kept the spare key from earlier. "Oh, Sarah." Beth crossed the room in 3 steps, Cooper following close behind. She knelt beside Sarah without hesitation, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Let it come. You've held it too long. They died because of his negligence." Sarah managed between ragged breaths. "A loose hydraulic line, something so simple, so preventable." "I know," Beth said quietly. "And you've carried that weight thinking it was yours. I was the pilot. I was responsible for flying the helicopter. Yes, not for sabotage." Beth's voice was firm. "Mike knew it wasn't your fault. That's why he wrote the letter." Sarah looked up, her face tear-streaked. "What do I tell their families that their loved ones died because someone couldn't be bothered to secure a line properly, that I've known the truth for less than 24 hours while they've suffered for 4 years? You tell them exactly that," Beth said, "and you let them process it however they need to, just like you're doing." Sarah's phone lit up with an incoming call. Detective Morgan. With trembling hands, she answered. "Captain Mitchell, I thought you should know. Judge Harrington is asking for you at the hospital. He's conscious and insisting on speaking with you tonight." "Did he say why?" "Something about the other victims. He says there were more cases like yours, more failures that were covered up. He wants to give you the files himself." The words landed like physical blows. More victims, more families destroyed by Reynolds' negligence. "I'll be there," Sarah said, her grief crystallizing into resolve. As she ended the call, Sarah looked at Ranger, her damaged, loyal partner who had saved a life today despite his own limitations. In his scarred face, she saw a reflection of her own broken pieces, and for the first time, recognized not just the damage, but the strength that had emerged from it. "We need to go back to the hospital," she told Beth, rising unsteadily to her feet. "This isn't over yet." Bozeman Medical Center's corridors were quieter at night, the overhead lights dimmed to accommodate sleeping patients. Sarah walked with purpose, Ranger at her side, Beth and Cooper following a few steps behind. The security guard at the nurses' station nodded them through after checking their IDs. Detective Morgan had called ahead to authorize the late visit. Judge Harrington was awake, propped up against pillows, his normally commanding presence diminished by hospital gown and IV lines. Still, his eyes were clear and alert as Sarah entered the room. "Captain Mitchell," he said, voice raspy but strong. "Or do you prefer Sarah now?" "Sarah is fine," she replied, moving to stand beside his bed. Ranger settled at her feet, vigilant as always. Harrington gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. What I have to tell you will take some time." Sarah lowered herself into the chair, noticing a worn leather briefcase on the bedside table. "Detective Morgan said you have information about other incidents?" "Yes." Harrington's expression darkened. "After your helicopter went down, I became suspicious. The pattern of injuries didn't align with the official explanation. The hydraulic fluid burns on 2 of your crew members suggested catastrophic line failure, not weather-related stress." "Why didn't you say anything then?" Sarah couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I tried." Harrington met her gaze steadily. "My concerns were dismissed. Military operations were at a critical phase. No one wanted to question the reliability of the helicopter fleet based on one doctor's observations." He reached for the briefcase, wincing as the movement pulled at his IV. "So I began collecting information privately, cross-referencing maintenance records with accident reports, looking for patterns." From the briefcase, he withdrew a thick folder and handed it to Sarah. 3 other incidents over 18 months, all involving hydraulic system failures in helicopters maintained by Reynolds's team. 2 resulted in emergency landings with injuries. 1 crash killed the pilot. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page showed a Black Hawk similar to hers, damaged but intact after a rough landing. The maintenance signature at the bottom of the attached report was unmistakable F. Reynolds. "He covered his tracks well," Harrington continued. "Each incident was attributed to different causes: pilot error, weather conditions, enemy fire. The pattern only becomes clear when you examine them together." "Does Reynolds know about this file?" "He suspected. That's why he tried to silence me yesterday and Judge Carlton today. Carlton was a former JAG officer who helped me access some of these records. When Reynolds saw us talking at the competition, he must have panicked." Sarah flipped through the pages, each one documenting another failure, another cover-up. Names and faces of pilots and crew members she'd never met, but who had suffered the same fate as her team. The scope of Reynolds' negligence was staggering. "Why now?" she asked, looking up from the file. "Why come forward after 4 years?" Harrington sighed heavily. "Cowardice, partly. I was nearing retirement, worried about repercussions. But seeing you and Ranger at the competition, both damaged but still fighting, made my silence shameful in comparison." He reached for a glass of water, his hand still unsteady. "The police have copies of everything. By the way, I gave them the full file this afternoon after they confirmed the poisoning. Reynolds will face charges for the attempted murders as well as criminal negligence in the maintenance failures." Sarah closed the folder, the weight of its contents settling into her bones. "The families deserve to know." "Yes," Harrington agreed quietly, "and they deserve to hear it from someone who understands their loss." His eyes met hers, the implication clear. The thought sent a wave of anxiety through Sarah. 4 years she'd avoided the families of her crew, unable to face them. Now she would have to tell them their loved ones had died needlessly. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "You crossed that judge's platform today despite your acrophobia," Harrington observed. "I'd say you're capable of more than you believe." Before Sarah could respond, a nurse entered to check Harrington's vitals. "You need rest, Judge," she said firmly. "Your visitors should return tomorrow." As Sarah stood to leave, Harrington caught her wrist. "There's something else you should know. About Corporal Daniels." Sarah tensed. "What about him?" The day before your crash. He came to me with more than just the letter. He had documentation maintenance logs, photos of the faulty work, evidence that would have grounded every helicopter Reynolds had touched. What happened to it? It disappeared from my office the day of the crash. I always suspected Reynolds took it. Harrington's grip tightened slightly. But Daniels was smart. He told me he'd hidden duplicate copies somewhere safe. Said if anything happened to him, his parents would know where to find them. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. His parents never mentioned any documents? Perhaps they didn't know what they had, or didn't understand its significance. Harrington released her wrist. It might be worth asking them. Outside in the corridor, Beth waited with Cooper, giving Sarah privacy for the conversation. One look at Sarah's face told her everything she needed to know. "That bad?" Beth asked. "Worse," Sarah replied, clutching the folder. "Reynolds' negligence killed more people than just my crew, and there might be evidence at the Daniels home evidence Mike hid before the crash." Beth nodded thoughtfully. "So what's our next move?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm walking away from this now? Besides, Cooper and Ranger work well together." Beth grinned, but her eyes remained serious. "You don't have to do this alone." "Sarah." The drive back to the motel was quiet. Sarah processing everything Harrington had shared. The scope of Reynolds' crimes had expanded exponentially, not just her crew, but others. Not just negligence, but deliberate cover-ups, and now attempted murder. At the motel, Sarah found 3 missed calls on her room phone, all from Detective Morgan. She returned the call immediately. "We've got a problem," Morgan said without preamble. "Reynolds made bail an hour ago. His lawyer argued he's not a flight risk due to his prominent business in the community." "He tried to kill 2 people," Sarah protested. "Allegedly. Without the toxicology results confirmed, the DA could only hold him on lesser charges for now." Morgan's frustration was evident. "We've got officers watching his property, but I wanted you to know, be careful." Sleep was impossible after that. Sarah sat cross-legged on the bed, Ranger's head in her lap, reading through Harrington's file until the words blurred before her eyes. The stories were all similar maintenance issues discovered too late. Emergency situations, injuries, or deaths. Investigations that concluded with no one held accountable. At dawn, she made the call she'd been avoiding. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, instantly recognizable despite the years. "Angela, it's Sarah Mitchell." A pause. Then, "Sarah, my goodness, it's been what? 4 years?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I haven't called before now." "Nonsense." "We understood. How's Ranger doing?" The simple question, asked with genuine warmth, broke something open in Sarah's chest. "He's amazing. Actually, he saved someone's life yesterday." "That sounds like a story I need to hear," Angela said, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice. "It is. But first, I need to ask you something important. Before the crash, did Mike leave anything with you? Documents? USB drives? Anything he asked you to keep safe?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "How did you know about that?" Angela finally asked, her voice suddenly cautious. Sarah's heart raced. "Judge Harrington told me. Mike left evidence of maintenance negligence with him, but it disappeared. He said Mike made copies. Yes, Angela confirmed. A sealed envelope with instructions not to open it unless something happened to him. After he died. We found it contained maintenance logs, photographs, and a memory card. We didn't understand most of it, all those technical terms, but we knew it was important. Do you still have it? Of course, Mike said it was his insurance policy. We've kept it in our safe deposit box. Angela paused. Is this related to why you're calling after all this time? Sarah took a deep breath. Yes. The man responsible for the negligence that caused our crash has been arrested. But there's more to the story, and we need Mike's evidence to make sure justice is served. The official report said it was mechanical failure due to weather conditions, Angela said. Confusion evident in her voice. That was a cover-up, Sarah said gently. The real cause was negligent maintenance that should have grounded the helicopter. And yours wasn't the only family affected. Angela's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. You're certain? Yes. I have proof now. But Mike's evidence would make the case airtight. We're in Florida, Angela said after a moment. It would take us days to get to Montana. I can come to you, Sarah offered. It's time I faced Mike's family anyway. I've been avoiding it too long. You've been healing, Angela corrected her softly. Mike would understand that better than anyone. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, with arrangements made for Sarah to fly to Tampa the following day. As she hung up, a text message came through from Detective Morgan. Reynolds not at home this morning. Officers lost track of him overnight. Stay alert. Sarah stared at the message, a cold certainty settling in her stomach. If Reynolds had made bail and disappeared, he would be desperate, and a desperate man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind of all. She looked at Ranger, who had sensed her tension and moved to alert position beside the door. Looks like we need to watch our backs. Boy, she said quietly. Outside the motel window, the first light of dawn illuminated the mountains surrounding Bozeman, beautiful, imposing, and suddenly seeming as treacherous as the Hindu Kush had been 4 years ago. Somewhere out there, Frank Reynolds was planning his next move, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't go down without a fight. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium of the Bozeman Community Center, Ranger sitting attentively at her side. The room was filled to capacity veterans, service dog handlers, local citizens, and representatives from the military families whose lives had been changed by Frank Reynolds' negligence and its subsequent exposure. The journey that brought me here today began with a fall from the sky, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her chest. Public speaking had never been her strength, even before the crash. But it wasn't until I hit the ground that I truly began to fall into isolation, into fear, into the belief that my broken pieces defined me. She glanced down at Ranger, drawing strength from his steady presence. The scars on his face had faded slightly over time, though his ear would always tilt at that peculiar angle that had once made him an object of ridicule. Now it was his signature, instantly recognizable to the community that had embraced them both. The truth about my helicopter crash didn't free me from my fear of heights. It didn't restore Ranger's hearing or erase either of our scars. What it did was unlock a door that had been shut for 4 years, a door leading not backward to who we were before, but forward to who we could become despite our damage. The investigation that followed Frank Reynolds's arrest had revealed a pattern of criminal negligence spanning nearly 5 years. Corporal Daniels's meticulous documentation, preserved by his parents and delivered by Sarah herself from Florida, provided the final evidence needed for federal charges. Reynolds had ultimately been convicted on multiple counts: criminal negligence resulting in death, attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and falsifying federal records. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. "Broken doesn't mean useless," Sarah continued, making eye contact with the audience members. "Sometimes our cracks are what let the light shine through. Sometimes our limitations become our greatest strengths." In the front row sat Beth Wilson with Cooper, now Sarah's closest friend and business partner. Beside her were Judge Harrington, fully recovered from his poisoning, and Dr. Emily Turner, the veterinarian who had first suggested entering Ranger in the competition that changed everything. The families of Sarah's crew occupied a special section: Angela and Robert Daniels, Louise Jackson with her teenage sons, the Chen family with their new baby named after their lost daughter, and Tom Miller's elderly parents. Initially, facing them had been the hardest part of Sarah's healing journey, but their forgiveness and understanding had provided a foundation for moving forward. When Ranger broke away from me during that competition, running toward danger instead of away from it, he wasn't failing at his task, he was excelling at his true purpose. His deafness in one ear hadn't diminished his abilities, it had enhanced his other senses. His trauma hadn't broken him, it had given him unique insight into suffering. The competition itself had never been completed after the dramatic events of the final day. Instead, the American Service Dog Association had created a special recognition award, the Ranger Award for Exceptional Acts of Service Beyond Training Parameters. Ranger had been its first recipient. His scarred face now featured on the medal given annually to dogs who demonstrated extraordinary perception and courage. Today, "I'm proud to announce the official opening of Broken Wings Ranch," Sarah said, her voice strengthening with pride. "Our program will pair veterans experiencing PTSD with rescue dogs that might otherwise be overlooked, those with physical differences or traumatic backgrounds. Together, these teams will discover that disability doesn't mean inability, and that sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts to others." The idea had come during those tense days following Reynolds' arrest and disappearance. While authorities searched for him, Sarah had found unexpected solace in working with other veterans and their service dogs. The Bozeman community had rallied around her, offering support and protection. When Reynolds was finally apprehended trying to cross into Canada, Sarah had already begun drafting plans for the ranch. Beth had been the first to volunteer, bringing her experience as both a veteran and a service dog handler. Dr. Turner offered discounted veterinary services. A local contractor himself, a Vietnam veteran, donated labor for renovating the facilities on Sarah's property. Slowly, a program took shape that would honor Mike Daniels' memory and the sacrifices of all those affected by Reynolds' crimes. 4 of these teams have already completed our inaugural training program, Sarah continued, gesturing to the side of the stage where 4 veterans stood with their service dogs, each animal bearing some visible difference: a missing leg, scarring, blindness in one eye. These teams are living proof that our value isn't diminished by our damage. The audience rose in standing ovation as the teams walked across the stage, each dog performing a specialized task tailored to their handler's needs. Sarah's eyes misted as she watched them broken pieces forming beautiful, functional wholes. "I want to thank those who stood by us during the darkest days," Sarah said as the applause subsided. "The investigators who pursued truth relentlessly, the medical professionals who saved lives, the community that protected us when we were vulnerable." Her eyes found Angela Daniels in the audience, and especially the families who trusted us with their loved ones' legacies. "Your grace and forgiveness taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring those we've lost by living fully despite our pain." As Sarah concluded her remarks, Ranger suddenly perked up, his good ear swiveling toward the back of the room. Following his gaze, Sarah spotted a late arrival slipping into a rear seat, a young Army captain in dress uniform, her insignia identifying her as a helicopter pilot. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken understanding passing between them, one pilot to another, one survivor to another. The reception afterward spilled onto the community center's lawn, the spring Montana sunshine warming the gathering. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each with a story to share or gratitude to express. Through it all, Ranger remained vigilant at her side, occasionally alerting her when her anxiety began to rise, guiding her to quieter spaces when the crowd became overwhelming. Captain Mitchell, the young helicopter pilot, had made her way through the crowd. "I'm Captain Jessica Reed. I just wanted to say thank you. Your testimony about the maintenance issues led to a complete overhaul of our inspection protocols. You've saved lives that will never know they were in danger." Sarah shook the woman's hand, recognizing in her the same confidence she had once possessed in the cockpit. "The credit belongs to Corporal Daniels. He documented everything, knowing it might cost him his career. Instead, it cost him his life," Captain Reed said softly. "Yes," Sarah acknowledged, "but his legacy saved others. That would matter to him." As the afternoon waned, the crowd thinned until only the core group remained. Beth, Dr. Turner, Judge Harrington, and the families. They gathered on the porch of the community center, sharing memories and plans for the future of Broken Wings Ranch. "Have you been up in the air yet?" Judge Harrington asked quietly when he found Sarah alone for a moment. She shook her head. "Not yet. But I climbed the silo on my property last week. Made it all the way to the top. Progress." He nodded approvingly. One step at a time. As twilight approached, Sarah and Ranger walked the short distance to her truck. The property she had once considered a refuge from the world had transformed into a center of healing and connection. The isolation that had once defined her existence had given way to purpose and community. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat of her truck, his scarred face turned toward her with that expression of absolute trust that still humbled her daily. As she started the engine, Sarah caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror, the lines around her eyes deeper. Perhaps, but the haunted look replaced by something steadier, more at peace. "Let's go home, boy," she said, reaching over to stroke his good ear. "We've got new teams arriving tomorrow." As they drove down the country road toward the ranch, the setting sun painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and purple. The same mountains that had once seemed to cage her now felt like a protective embrace around the life she was rebuilding. Not a life without scars or limitations, but one made richer and more meaningful because of them. Like Ranger, with his tilted ear and unwavering heart. Sarah had learned that being broken didn't mean being defeated. It meant having the courage to piece yourself together differently, sometimes stronger than before. Life doesn't spare any of us from hardship. Like Sarah and Ranger, many of us carry scars, some visible, others hidden deep within. At our age, we've weathered losses, faced health challenges, and perhaps felt increasingly invisible in a world that worships youth. But remember this: our value isn't diminished by our years or our wounds. The wisdom etched in our wrinkles, the resilience forged through our struggles, these aren't weaknesses, but treasures earned through living. Just as Ranger's damaged ear made him more attuned to other senses, our limitations can become unexpected strengths. Perhaps your hands now struggle with tasks they once performed easily, but they've held children, created homes, and comforted loved ones through decades of faithful service. Maybe your memory occasionally falters, but it holds stories and lessons that deserve to be shared. The younger generation needs our experience, our perspective, our hard-won wisdom about what truly matters. Like Sarah, discovering her purpose wasn't in perfect healing, but in meaningful service. Our greatest contributions may still lie ahead, not despite our brokenness, but because of how it has shaped us into who we are today.